Now, medicines regulation is at the heart of EU health policy in Europe. It ensures that every pill, tablet, injection is safe and effective, that regulators have the data they need to track medicines and guarantee their integrity and to monitor side effects, and to ensure the development of tomorrow's medicines happens efficiently and through seamless and safe clinical trials. Innovation is constantly driving change at the EMA. So Emer, I'm very happy to discuss how some of these changings are affecting the work that you're doing at the moment. As Sarah mentioned, since you were with us for our summit a year ago, we've had several EU health files land and are expecting several more in a few weeks, all of which have an impact on the medicines regulatory system. So bouncing off of Rory's panel on the EU Life Sciences Strategy, which came out in July, that set the course for numerous changes, and among them, which we've already had a mention of this morning, is the Biotech Act, the first part of which we expect to cover medicines and will be presented in mid-December. And I'd love to hear from you, Emer, from the EMA's perspective, what are the key challenges in the biotech sector, and what proposals are you hoping to see to solve some of those problems?
So good morning, everybody, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you for reminding me that it's almost exactly 5 years since actually I started this job, and what an exciting 5 years it's been. And thank you very much, Helen, for giving me this opportunity to speak today. You know, it is really a fascinating time in European pharmaceutical history. We have got so much happening at the moment. We've got the pharma package hopefully nearing completion, and I'm one of the optimists that really believe it's going to be there by the end of the year. We've just heard about the Life Sciences Strategy, and we know we've got the Critical Medicines Act on the table, and we'll have the Biotech Act and the revision of the medical devices regulation by the end of the year. So huge amount going on. But if we think about biotech in particular and the hopes and dreams of the Biotech Act, I think what we see is that we have a really vibrant biotech industry in Europe. But in terms of the ecosystem, we don't get from the actual research to the product because we don't connect all the dots along the way. And that's why I think the life science strategy is so important, because it addresses these issues across various interfaces. From our side, we have a job to do in helping to encourage innovation. And a lot of that innovation is biotech innovation these days. But people have to come to, if we are going to encourage innovation, we have to know what's happening. So how do we get to know what's happening? How do we know what's happening in the different biotech hubs and the technology transfer offices? How do we get them to understand what the regulatory implications are? So part of it is, again, about connecting what's happening in the research area and helping translate that into innovation that reaches patients. And that's something we feel very strongly about. We have a regulatory science and innovation task force looking at this. We're looking at how we reach out better to biotech hubs, technology transfer offices, how we anticipate what the new innovations are going to be and make sure we have the resources and expertise to be able to make sure that those do reach the market, because we have to think differently, and that's really important if we're going to encourage this sector. So part of it is how we enable the ecosystem, and I guess the other part is once it gets to the stage that it will be a medicinal product, can we help in the various aspects of the authorization? And one of the things we know we can do better is in the facilitation of clinical trials, and we think that will be part of the Biotech Act. So again, we think this is something that we do need to put more attention on. We need to look at more risk-based approaches. We need to improve the operation of the clinical trial information system. And we really need to translate the ambitions of the legislations into practical outcomes.
Thank you, Emer. We're increasingly seeing advanced therapies come through the pipelines of companies such as cell and gene therapies and coming to market. But it is notable in the general pharmaceutical legislation, for example, that we're going to be getting rid of both the advanced therapies and the orphan drugs committees that largely deal with the authorization and consideration of these types of therapies. Do we have the right regulatory infrastructure to cope with this growing trend in biotech?
So I think that's a very important question, and I think we should see the change in the structure at the European Medicines Agency and the change in committee structure as an opportunity to ensure that we have really the best expertise in the system to help us regulate these ATMPs, gene therapies, etc. Now, at the moment, we have great expertise in our Committee for Advanced Therapy, but a sitting committee can't be aware of every single new innovation that's coming up. So the possibility of getting ad hoc expertise and building that into the process, I think, is very exciting and can help the overall infrastructure. I also think it's very important that we get the patient voice here. We've heard a lot about the patient voice earlier. I mean, patients know more about their diseases than regulators do. We need to understand what matters to patients. So that's another opportunity to make sure we get the patient voice from the various disease areas into the system. So it's about broadening the expertise and having more agility as regards specific interventions and diseases.
Thank you. And another element in the Biotech Act we've talked about this morning is changes to the clinical trials setup. And we've been hearing that Europe has been losing ground to the US and China when it comes to the number of clinical trials it does, which matters because these tend to be launched first where they are studied. We've got what feels like a fairly recently launched clinical trials regulation in Europe. I mean, it came into effect, in fact, in 2022, has had a phased rollout and actually was only fully operational since January of this year. The EMA hosts that clinical trials portal and website, but industry and some patient groups have been telling us that some of these rules are actually slowing down the launch of clinical trials. So I wanted to ask you, why is this legislation apparently out of sync with today's needs? And do you think we need to reform it already?
Well, I think the clinical trial regulation is a very interesting piece of legislation because I think it dates back to 2014 and came into effect, as you said, after the various transition stages, actually January this year. And it was one of these pieces of legislation where there was a huge amount of technological details actually in the legislation. And if you think about how fast innovation and technology has changed in the last 10 years, I don't think it's really surprising that the provisions that are in a piece of legislation may not be fully adapted to today's reality. So I think it's a huge opportunity to look at this differently now and to really look at how we can use the Biotech app to help us really future-proof and enable some of the technological changes that were not around when the clinical trial regulation was first written.
Thank you. And we've heard a lot from the Health Commissioner, Oliver Varhelyi, that we should expect artificial intelligence to play a greater role in clinical trials. I wonder what your interpretation of that is, and firstly, and where you think AI could play a role.
So I think we're, for me, that's almost the million-dollar question because AI is a technology, and it wasn't there when the clinical trial, well, probably was actually, but it wasn't at the forefront of everybody's mind when the clinical trial regulation was being written, and people were not thinking about how you can use AI to facilitate, streamline, and take some of the more, how will I say, repetitive tasks away. I think we need to have a strong focus on value-added tasks that are done by humans and expertise. but where we can use AI to facilitate processes, and we do have challenging processes across a 27 or 30 EEA-driven system, I think we need to look at those opportunities, but we need to do it in a way that's safe and ethical and meets the requirements of the Artificial Intelligence Act. But we're doing a lot of experimentation on AI at the moment. We're already using it for our Scientific Explorer, helping us access information from scientific advice letters, and there's a big roadmap that we're working on, which will also enable some of the changes in the Biotech Act.
Sticking with the life sciences strategy, it also sets out measures on the need to boost trust in the sector and its innovations, and especially among young people. The issue of trust in science has been growing in recent years, with disinformation spread around the COVID-19 vaccines and therapies in the pandemic, but also today with statements from the United States linking paracetamol taken in pregnancy and vaccines to higher rates of autism in children. So first of all, I have to ask you, Emer, given that the FDA and the EMA work so closely together, how have those kinds of statements impacted that close working relationship?
So I think, first of all, let me say that we have a long-standing relationship with the FDA, and that relationship continues and is extremely valuable. And one of the areas that I mentioned just earlier was in the area of AI, and we will be coming out with joint AI principles from FDA and EMA, and that'll be coming out very, very shortly. I think we all struggle with the issue of trust in science and the changing geopolitical situation, and I think of it as the executive director of the European Medicines Agency. I think of it about how we can ensure we have facts, that our decisions are informed by science and they are fact and evidence-based. And I think that's our commitment to Europe, and that's our commitment to the world. So if there is a concern about paracetamol in autism, we have to be there to outline what the science says, what evidence we have to support or not support that. And I can say that the evidence we have, and we had done a recent study on paracetamol, did not show that there was a risk of autism with paracetamol use in pregnancy. And I think it's very important that we continue to make sure that our decisions and outcomes are science-based and fact-based.
And we're seeing the Make America Healthy Again movement arrived in Europe last month with the MIHA, Make Europe Healthy Again movement, supported by some of the supporters of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his team. We're seeing this narrative become quite strong in Europe at the moment. I just wondered whether or not the EMA has adapted its communications policy or is thinking about it to really kind of react more quickly or preempt these kinds of statements. I know that some governments are recruiting influencers, for example, and agencies to really get the message across to younger people. And I wondered if that was something the EMA is doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, this gives me the opportunity to tell you about lots of the ideas that we're working on in the communication area, because we are living in a different reality than the reality of the regulatory system that was set up 30 years ago. So we are working with content creators. We've actually launched a pilot to work with content creators on GLP-1 agonists, and this is also about trying to raise awareness of the dangers of buying online, of falsified medicines. We've also just launched a campaign on shortages jointly done with pharmacists and healthcare professionals to try and ensure that everybody, this was on shortages, to try and ensure that everybody realizes the role that they have to play in managing shortages. The tagline is, it takes a team, and it's trying to say this is part of a big system and we all need to play our part. We've also, another area that we've invested in is in trying to get our own staff who are very active in social media to be ambassadors for the work that EMA does. So they can use their platforms to talk about different things that we're doing in their own words, and hopefully having influence in areas that we mightn't reach from a corporate standpoint.
Thank you. And since we last met, Europe has really pivoted around the competitiveness mantra across all sectors. We know that clinical trials is an area of improvement, but we also hear and have heard this morning that the time it takes to have a product assessed and get to market is an issue, and something that can be improved, and there are ambitions to do so within the general pharmaceutical legislation. I also note that since we last spoke, the US has launched a pilot for assessing some promising medicines within 1 to 2 months. I just wanted to get your view on this very short US timeline and whether or not it's really possible to compress those assessment periods like that.
I think we have to really understand what our responsibility, what my responsibility as European Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency. Our responsibility is to ensure that the products that reach patients are safe, of high quality and effective. And that's about understanding the product, understanding the impact, and working with expertise to make that happen. And that's what we commit to do as Europe, and we will continue to do that. And yes, we need to do this faster, because it's also about making sure that unmet needs get reached, that patients who have challenges with access to medicines, that we can play our part in that game. I think we always have to look at what others are doing and what they're learning, and whether we can use those learnings in our own operations, and that's something we'll keep an eye on and see what we can do in the future.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, but one final question, Emer. What, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge facing the EMA over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I have to say, I think the biggest challenge is really realizing the potential of the pharmaceutical legislation and the other legislative acts that are on the table at the moment, because there are huge opportunities here to change the way we do things, to serve our patients better, to serve European citizens better. But there's a lot going on. So to get it really right means we all have to knuckle up and work together and make sure that we do take these opportunities to make Europe healthy again.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Emer, for joining us today and for your time coming from Amsterdam. There's so much more I'm sure we could discuss, but I'm pretty sure people are getting hungry now, so I will leave it there. Thank you, Emer.
Okay, well, it's great to have Emer here. Helen, thank you for joining me again. We've talked about so much today, had several high-profile interviews with Emer Cooke, with Sandra Galina, discussions about the Critical Medicines Act, the lifestyle strategy. One thing that stood out to me throughout these discussions was the transition of the relationship with the United States, not just competition, but almost antagonism, whether it's fighting to have drug makers based there, whether it's Trump's pressure on European drug pricing systems, or the Maha movement's kind of fueling skepticism on regulators.
Yeah, I think we've heard quite a few discussions that have brought in the US geopolitics with us today. I thought that was quite interesting what Emer just said about them continuing to work very strongly together with the FDA and bringing out a joint position on AI in medicines regulation. That's news to me, so there's a new headline for us to come out on that soon. But yes, and also people in Europe really touting the strengths of what Europe has, sort of countering the US discussion around sort of the investment sort of push to invest in America by saying, well, we've actually got a really huge single market here, and we have a public health system broadly. So that's, you know, huge payers, and things do tend to get reimbursed at a very wide level.
And the other tension that I think we'll continue to hear is, on the one hand, the sense of urgency. We heard Sandra Galina, I'm going to repeat the line again, you know, no time to lose, and that's why it's okay to skip some impact assessments. On the other hand, you know, there's constant concern about unintended consequences. And as we heard Natalie Mull from FPSA, and it's true, it's a call that she's been making for a long time to kind of have bigger conversations about re-envisioning the whole system. You know, where is the balance between rushing and deliberating?
If I had the answer to that, I would be probably paid a lot better. But yeah, it's a really difficult equation to balance. And you've heard, I think, from people from all sides of the equation how challenging it is, and it's not going to get any easier because of the demographic changes we're seeing. We're seeing aging populations, we're seeing increasing demand for healthcare, and shrinking taxpayers to afford to pay for it. So I think there are some big challenges ahead for EU policymakers, and we'll be here to cover it.
One last point, this idea of health security kind of came about during the period of COVID, but then the conversation just seemed to, and the budgets seemed to want to prioritize, again, just old-fashioned defense security, you know, in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion, the pullback from the US. Do you get the sense that this sector is kind of successfully making the argument that health security is security?
Another good question. It does feel like it is penetrating. I think we're seeing that in the Critical Medicines Act, especially with everything being so critical. It has to be, you know, something that health systems, if they don't have it, it can really have a huge impact on those populations. So it does seem to be penetrating. I do question if there's a slightly opportunistic approach here, trying to see, you know, such a huge budget for defense, and if there's an opportunity to potentially be able to access that cash as well.
All right, Helen, thank you so much for your takeaways. Before we close, I'd like to thank our sponsors for their support. The leading partners are AstraZeneca, Haleon, MedTech Europe, and Sanofi. The presenting partners are FPA, Johnson & Johnson, Lilly, and Sandoz. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in online. We'll be back at 2 p.m. for the afternoon program, delving into preparedness and prevention. And for those in the room, let's eat. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay.